Good evening, everyone. Tonight we are going to be reading through chapter 43 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. If this is your first time watching, this is not a typical reading because we are going to stop and talk about interesting vocabulary words or phrases that maybe if you're learning English you probably don't understand. So if you are watching this live with me, and we are doing this live, then I encourage you to make questions, make comments in the comments section, in the chat section. If you don't, then I will just sometimes stop to talk about words I think you probably don't know or I think might be useful to you, or phrases that maybe I think need explanation for you. Or sometimes I stop because I don't understand a word. All right, so this is chapter 43 of David Copperfield, another retrospect. Once again, let me pause upon a memorable period of my life. Let me stand aside to see the phantoms of those days gone by me, accompanying the shadow of myself in dim procession. Weeks, months, seasons pass along, and they seem a little more than a summer day and a winter evening. Now the common where I walk with Dora is all in bloom, a field of bright gold. And now the unseen heather lies in mounds and bunches underneath a covering of snow. In a breath, the river that flows through our Sunday walks is sparkling in the summer sun, is ruffled by the winter wind, is thickened with drifting heaps of ice, faster than the ever river ran towards the sea. It flashes, darkens, and rolls away. Not a thread changes in the house of the two little bird-like ladies. The clock ticks over the fireplace, the weather glass hangs in the hall. Neither clock nor weather glass is ever right, but we believe in both devoutly. I have come legally to man's estate. I have attained the dignity of 21. But this is a sort of dignity that may be thrust upon me. Let me think of what I have achieved. I have tamed that savage stenographic mystery, make a respectable income by it. I am in high repute of my accomplishment in all pertaining to the art, and am joined with 11 others in reporting the debates in Parliament for a morning newspaper. Night after night, I record predictions that never come to pass, professions that are never fulfilled, explanations that are only meant to mystify. I wallow. Do you know wallow? There is pigs. You know, certain religions don't like to eat pigs. They say they're dirty. And, you know, pigs love dirt. And they live in dirt. I guess that's why certain religions don't like them, because they actually live in dirt. But the place where... Well, let's look at a picture of a pig for a minute. This is kind of funny. Let's see. This is for an interesting vocabulary word. This is all in the service of an interesting vocabulary word. Oh, this doesn't... Let me find a good picture. Well, this is good enough, I suppose. Let's see if you can see it. And so you see, this is where pigs live. They live in the dirt, and they love the dirt. They love to roll around the dirt. And this is wallowing. But you have to imagine it's in dirt. So when you're doing this, you're a pig and you just love rolling around in the dirt. That's wallowing. So actually you use that a lot when you talk about someone enjoying being disgusting. You say that you're wallowing in your own poop. But you use a stronger word than poop, which I won't use on YouTube. But that's a very common expression. Somebody who's wallowing in their own poop is someone who enjoys being disgusting and horrible. How did they use wallowing here? I wallow in words. Well, so this is not horrible. He's using it in a nice way. He enjoys, oh, I love all these words. I'm like a pig in dirt, in poop. I wallow in words. Britannia, that unfortunate female, is always before me, like a trust fowl, skewered through and through with office pens, and bound hands. Here, bound means tied. Bound hands, and foot with red tape. Hand and foot with red tape. I am sufficiently behind the scenes to know the worth of political life. I am quite an infidel about it. I'm just reading that again. I am sufficiently behind the words to know the worth of political life. I am quite an infidel about it, and I shall never be converted. My dear old Traddles has tried his hand at the same pursuit, but it is not in Traddles' way. He is perfectly good-humored, respecting his failure, and reminds me that he always did consider himself slow. He has the occasional employment on the same newspaper and getting up the facts of dry subjects. Dry subjects, that means like boring subjects. To be written about and embellished by more fertile minds. He is called to the bar, with admirable industry and self-denial, has scraped another £100 together to fee a conveyancer, whose chambers he attends. A great deal of very hot port wine was consumed at his call, and considering the figure, I should think the Inner Temple must have made a profit by it. I have come out in another way. I have taken with fear and trembling to authorship. I wrote a little something in secret and sent it to a magazine, and it was published in the magazine. Since then, I have taken heart to write a good many trifling pieces. Trifling means insignificant, not very important. So Davy is writing things, but they're not important. It's not an important thing that he's doing. I am well off. Usually when you say well off, that means I have a lot of money, more than I need. I don't know if that's what he means here, but let's see. Now I'm regularly paid for them. Altogether, I am well off. Yeah, he's making pretty good money now. When I tell my income on the fingers of my left hand, I pass the third finger and take in the fourth with the middle joint. We have removed from Buckingham Street to a pleasant little cottage very near the one I looked at when my enthusiasm first came on. My aunt, however, who has sold the house at Dover to good advantage, is not going to remain here, but intends removing herself to a still more tiny cottage close at hand. What does this portend? Marriage? Yes. Yes, I am going to be married to Dora. Miss Lavinia and Miss Clarissa have given their consent, and if ever canary birds were in a flutter, flutter is like the movement of bird wings or butterfly wings, fluttering. They are. Miss Lavinia, self-charged with the superintendence of my darling's wardrobe, is constantly cutting out brown paper cuirasses. I don't know what that Cuirasses? What is that word? It must be something to do with making dresses. Let's see. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Cuirass, a piece of armor consisting of a breastplate and a backplate fastened together. I have no idea. Something to do with clothes. Okay. Is constantly cutting out brown paper cuirasses and differing in opinion of a highly respectable young man with a long bundle and a yard measure under his arm. She's making her a dress, maybe her wedding dress. A dressmaker, always stabbed in the breast with the needle and thread, boards and lodges in the house, and seems to me eating, drinking, or sleeping, never taking her thimble off. They make a lay figure of my dear. They are always sending her to come and try something on. We can't be happy together for 5 minutes in the evening, but some intrusive female knocks on the door and says, "Oh, if you please, Miss Dora, would you step upstairs?" Miss Clarissa and my aunt roam all over London to find out articles of furniture for Dora and me to look at. It would be better for them to buy the goods at once, without this ceremony of inspection, for when we go to see a kitchen fender and meat screen, Dora sees a Chinese house for Jip, with tall bells on the tower, and prefers that. And it takes a long time to accustom Jip to his new residence. After we have bought it, whenever he goes out, in or out, he makes all the little bells ring, and is horribly frightened. Peggotty comes to make herself useful, and falls to work immediately. Her department appears to be to clean everything over and over again. She rubs everything that can be rubbed until it shines, like her own honest forehead, with perpetual friction. And now it is that I begin to see her solitary brother passing through the dark streets at night, and looking as he goes among the wandering faces. I never speak to him at such an hour. I know too well, as his grave figure passes onward, what he seeks and what he dreads. Dreading is like having a horrible feeling something horrible is going to happen. It's almost like being afraid. Why does Traddles look so important when he calls upon me this afternoon in the Commons, where I still occasionally attend for form's sake, when I have time? The realization of my boyish daydreams is at hand, and I'm going to take out the license. It is a little document to do so much, and Traddles contemplates it as it lies upon my desk, half in admiration and half in awe. There are the names, in the sweet old visionary connection: David Copperfield and Dora Spenlow. And there in the corner is that parental institution, the stamp office, which is so benignantly interested in the various transactions of human life, looking upon our union. And there is the Archbishop of Canterbury invoking the blessing on us in print, and doing it as cheap as could possibly be expected. Nevertheless, I'm in a dream, a flustered, happy, hurried dream. I can't believe that it's going to be, and yet I can't believe that everyone I pass in the street must have some kind of perception that I am to be married the day after tomorrow. The surrogate knows me when I go down to be sworn, and disposes of me easily, as if there were a Masonic understanding between us. Traddles is not at all wanted, but is in attendance as a general backer. I hope the next time you come here, my dear fellow, I say to Traddles, it will be on the same errand for yourself, and I hope it will be soon. Thank you for your good wishes, my dear Copperfield, he replies. I hope so too. It's a satisfaction to know that she'll wait for me at any length of time, and that she really is the dearest girl. When are you to meet her at the coach? I ask. At 7, says Traddles, looking at his plain old silver watch, the very watch he once took a wheel out of at school to make a watermill. That is about Miss Wickfield's time, is it not? A little earlier. Her time is 8:30, I assure you, my dear boys, says Traddles. I'm almost as pleased as if I were going to be married myself to think that this event is coming to such a happy termination, and really the great friendship and consideration of personally associating Sophie with the joyful occasion and inviting her to be a bridesmaid in conjunction with Miss Wickfield demands my warmest thanks. I'm extremely sensible of it. I hear him and I shake hands with him, and we talk and walk and dine and so on, but I don't believe it. Nothing is real. Sophie arrives at the house of Dora's aunts in due course, and she has the most agreeable of faces, not absolutely beautiful, but extraordinarily pleasant, and is one of the most genial, unaffected, frank, engaging creatures I have ever seen. Traddles presents her to us with great pride and rubs his hands for 10 minutes by the clock, with every individual hair upon his head, standing on tiptoe when I congratulate him in a corner on his choice. I have brought Agnes from the Canterbury coach, and her cheerful, beautiful face is among us for the second time. Agnes has a great liking for Traddles, and it is capital to see them meet, and to observe the glory of Traddles as he commends the dearest girl in the world to her acquaintance. Still, I don't believe it. We have a delightful evening and are supremely happy, but I don't believe it yet. I can't collect myself. I can't check off my happiness as it takes place. I feel in a misty, unsettled kind of state. And if I had got up very early in the morning, a week or two ago, and had never been to bed since, I can't make out when yesterday was. I seem to have been carrying the license about in my pocket many months. Next day too, when we all go in a flock to see the house, our house, Dora's and mine, I'm quite unable to regard myself as its master. I seem to be there by permission of somebody else. I half expect the real master to come home presently and say he's glad to see me, such a beautiful little house as it is, with everything so bright and new, with the flowers on the carpets looking as if freshly gathered, and the green leaves on the paper as if they had just come out, with the spotless muslin curtains and the blushing rose-colored furniture, and Dora's garden hat with the blue ribbon. Do I remember now how I loved her in such another hat when I first saw her? Already hanging on its little peg, the guitar case quite at home on its heels in a corner, and everybody tumbling over Jip's pagoda, which is much too big for the establishment. Another happy evening. quite as unreal as the rest of it, and I steal into the usual room before going away. Dora isn't there. I suppose they have not done trying on yet. Miss Lavinia peeps in and tells me mysteriously that she'll not be long. She is rather long, notwithstanding, but by and by I hear rustling at the door, and someone taps. Just a reminder, because we've talked about this word rustling before. It's kind of this sound. So, imagine they're all wearing these very big dresses. You can hear them coming because you can hear the clothes rubbing together. I hear wrestling at the door, and someone taps. I say, "Come in," but someone taps again. I go to the door, wondering who it is. There, I meet a pair of bright eyes and a blushing face, and they are Dora's eyes and face. And Miss Lavinia has dressed her in tomorrow's dress, bonnet and all, for me to see. I take my little wife to my heart, and Miss Lavinia gives a little scream because I tumble the bonnet, and Dora laughs and cries at once because I'm so pleased, and I believe it less than ever. "Do you think it's pretty, Dodie?" says Dora. "Pretty? I should rather think I did." "And are you sure you like me very much?" says Dora. The topic is fraught with such danger to the bonnet. Miss Lavinia gives another little scream and begs me to understand that Dora is only to be looked at and on no account to be touched. So Dora stands in a delightful state of confusion for a minute or two to be admired, and then takes off her bonnet, looking so natural without it, and runs away with it in her hand, and comes dancing down again in her own familiar dress, and asks Jip if I have got a beautiful little wife, and whether he'll forgive her for being married, and kneels down to make him stand upon a cookery book for the last time in her single life. I go home more incredulous than ever to a lodging that I have hard by, and get up very early in the morning to ride to Highgate Road and fetch my aunt. I have never seen my aunt in such a state. She's dressed in lavender-colored silk and has a white bonnet on and is amazing. Janet has dressed her and is there to look at me. Peggotty is ready to go to church, intending to behold the ceremony from the gallery. Mr. Dick, who is to give my darling to me at the altar, has had his hair curled. Traddles, whom I have taken up by appointment at the turnpike, presents a dazzling combination of cream color and light blue, and both he and Mr. Dick have a general effect upon them of being all gloves. No doubt I see this because I know it is so, but I am astray. We've also talked about that word astray before, which means not being in the place where you're supposed to be. So maybe Davy is supposed to be happy, but he's nervous or confused. I'm not sure what he means by astray, but he's not feeling what he's supposed to be feeling, or he's not physically in the place where he's supposed to be. Let's see. Maybe if we read more, we'll see what that means here. Nor do I believe anything. I'll start from the beginning. No doubt I see this, because I know it is so, but I am astray and seem to see nothing. Oh, so maybe that means, I think maybe what he's saying is they seem a little bit uncomfortable in their clothes, and, or that they look really wonderful. But anyway, he can't focus on that. He's thinking about, his mind is somewhere else. That's the astray part, I think, here. Nor do I believe anything, whatever. Yeah, so he's having like a dissociative experience. He's there, he's seeing it, but his mind and his heart and his feelings are somewhere else. So he's physically there experiencing it, but he's astray, he's somewhere else. Still, as we drive along in an open carriage, this fairy marriage is real enough to fill me with a sort of wondering pity for the unfortunate people who have no part in it, but are sweeping out the shops and going to their daily occupations. My aunt sits with my hand in hers, as always. When we stop a little way short of the church to put down Peggotty, whom we have brought on the box, she gives it a squeeze, and me a kiss. God bless you, Trot, my own boy never could be dearer. I think of poor dear baby this morning. So do I, and of all I owe you, dear aunt. Tut, child, says my aunt, and gives her hand in overflowing cordiality to Traddles, who then gives it to Mr. Dick, who then gives it to me, who then gives mine to Traddles, and then we go into the church door. The church is calm enough, I'm sure, but it might be a steam power loom in full action. For any sedative effect it has on me, I'm too far gone for that. The rest is all more or less an incoherent dream. A dream of their coming in with Dora, of the pew opening and arranging us, like a drill sergeant before the altar rails of my wondering, even then, why pew openers must always be the most disagreeable females procurable, and whether there is any religious dread of a disastrous infection of good humor which renders it indispensable to set those vessels of vinegar upon the road to heaven. Of the clergyman and clerk appearing, of a few boatmen, and some other people strolling in, of an ancient mariner behind me, strongly flavoring the church with rum, of the service, beginning in a deep voice, and our all being very attentive, of Miss Lavinia, who acts as a semi-auxiliary bridesmaid. Being the first to cry, and of her doing homage, as I take it, to the memory of Pidger in sobs, of Miss Clarissa applying a smelling bottle, of Agnes taking care of Dora, of my aunt endeavoring to represent herself as a model of sternness, with tears rolling down her face, of little Dora trembling very much and making her responses in faint whispers, of our kneeling down together, side by side, of Dora's trembling less and less, but always clasping Agnes by the hand, of the service being so got through quietly and gravely, of our all looking at each other in an April state of smiles and tears, when it was over, of my young wife being hysterical in the vestry and crying for her poor papa, her dear papa, of her soon cheering up again, and our signing the register all around, of my going into the gallery for Peggotty to bring her to sign it, of Peggotty's hugging me in a corner and telling me she saw my own dear mother married, of its being over and our going away, of my walking so proudly and lovingly down the aisle with my sweet wife upon my arms, through a mist of half-seen people, pulpits, monuments, pews, fonts, organs, and church windows, in which there flutter faint airs of association with my childish church at home so long ago. of their whispering as we pass, "What a youthful couple we are, and what a pretty little wife she is." Of our all being so merry and talkative in the carriage going back, of Sophie telling us that when she saw Traddles, whom I had entrusted with the license, asked for it, she almost fainted, having been convinced that he would contrive to lose it, or to have his pocket picked. Of Agnes laughing gaily, and of Dora being so fond of Agnes that she will not be separated from her, but still keeps her hand. Of there being a breakfast with an abundance of things pretty and substantial to eat and drink, whereof I partake as I should do in any other dream, without the least perception of their flavor, eating and drinking, as I may say, nothing but love and marriage, and no more believing in the viands than in anything else. Of my making a speech in the same dreamy fashion, without having an idea of what I want to say beyond such as may be comprehended in the full conviction that I haven't said it. Of our being very sociably and simply happy, always in a dream though. And of Gyps having wedding cake, and it's not agreeing with him afterwards. If something doesn't agree with you, it makes you sick. So if you eat something and then later you don't feel very well in your stomach, you say, "Oh, that didn't agree with me." So Jip ate cake at the wedding and it didn't agree with him. And how would you know that from a dog? Probably he vomited somewhere. Of the pair of hired post horses being ready, and of Dora's going away to change her dress, of my aunt, and Miss Clarissa remaining with us, an hour walking in the garden, and my aunt, who has made quite a speech at breakfast touching Dora's aunts, being mightily amused with herself, but a little too proud of it too. Of Dora's being ready, and of Miss Lavinia's hovering about her, loath to lose the pretty toy that has given her so much pleasant occupation. Of Dora's making long series of surprised discoveries that she has forgotten all sorts of little things, and of everybody's running everywhere to fetch them. Of their all closing about Dora, closing about meaning going closer and closer, so Dora's in the middle and people are getting closer and closer to her like a circle, getting smaller. When at last she begins to say goodbye, looking with their bright colors and ribbons like a bed of flowers. Of my darling being almost smothered among the flowers and coming out, laughing and crying both together, to my jealous arms. Uh-oh, I've lost my place. Oh, here we are. Okay. Of my wanting to carry Jip, who is to go along with us, and Dora saying no, that she must carry him, or else he'll think she don't like him any more, now she is married, and will break his heart. Of our going arm in arm, and Dora stopping and looking back and saying, "If I've ever been cross or ungrateful to anybody, don't remember it," and bursting into tears. Of her waving her little hand, and our going away once more, of her once more stopping and looking back and hurrying to Agnes and giving Agnes, above all others, her last kisses and farewells. We drive away together, and I awake from the dream. I believe it at last. It is my dear, dear little wife beside me, whom I love so well. "Are you happy now, you foolish boy?" says Dora, "and sure you don't repent?" I have stood aside to see the phantoms of those days go by me. they are gone. And I resume the journey of my story. All right, well, so that was the end of chapter 43, which is pretty short, so I guess also we'll read chapter 44 tonight. But before we start chapter 44, I have to take a 1-minute break. I will be right back. All right, thank you for waiting. We're back. So that was chapter 43. Davy finally got married to Dora. Now let's see what happens next. Chapter 44, Our Housekeeping. Housekeeping back then meant all the responsibilities of the house. So paying bills, doing grocery shopping, cleaning, planning meals. It was a full-time job. And Dora doesn't like any of that stuff. It was a strange condition of things, the honeymoon being over and the bridesmaids gone home, when I found myself sitting down in my own small house with Dora, quite thrown out of employment, as I may say, in respect of the delicious old occupation of making love. It seemed such an extraordinary thing to have Dora always there. It was so unaccountable not to be obliged to go out and see her. Unaccountable here means strange. Not to have any occasion to be tormenting myself about her, not to have to write to her, not to be scheming and devising opportunities of being alone with her. And sometimes of an evening, when I looked up from my writing and saw her seated opposite, I would lean back in my chair and think how queer, that means strange, how queer it was that we were alone together. As a matter of course. Nobody's business any more. All the romance of our engagement put away upon a shelf to rust. No one to please but one another to please for life. When there was a debate, and I was kept out very late, it seemed so strange to me, as I was walking home, to think that Dora was at home. It was such a wonderful thing, at first, to have her coming softly down to talk to me as I ate my supper. It was such a stupendous thing to know for certain that she put her hair in papers. It was altogether such an astonishing event to see her do it. So I think that means, like, at night she probably does things to her hair. I think ladies now sometimes they use curlers to curl their hair, but she was using some kind of paper. I doubt whether two young birds could have known less about keeping house than I and my pretty Dora did. We had a servant, of course. She kept house for us. I have still a latent belief that she must have been Mrs. Crupp's daughter in disguise. We had such an awful time. With Mary Ann. Her name was Paragon. Her nature was represented to us when we engaged her as being feebly expressed in her name. She had a written character, as large as a proclamation, and according to this document, could do everything of a domestic nature that I've ever heard of, and a great many things that I have never heard of. She was a woman in the prime of life, of a severe countenance. Remember, countenance is how you show your emotions. So if you have a severe means serious. She was a very serious person. She looked very serious. She had a severe countenance. And subject, particularly in the arms, to a sort of perpetual measles, a fiery rash. Measles, that's like a disease that little children get, and you get little red thing. I had the measles when I was little, I think. You get little red things all over your face. Or all over your body, I think. And perpetual means forever. So she looked like she always had the measles. She had little red marks all over her face. She had a cousin in the Lifeguards with such long legs that he looked like the afternoon shadow of somebody else. His shell jacket was much too little for him, as he was too big for the premises. He made the cottage smaller than it need have been, by being so very much out of proportion to it, besides which the walls were not thick, and whenever he passed the evening at our house, we always knew of it by hearing of continual growl in the kitchen. Our treasure was warranted sober and honest. I am therefore willing to believe that she was in a fit when we found her under the boiler. What? Our treasure was sober, warranted, and honest. So our treasure was warranted. That means we deserved it. Sober, meaning serious, and honest. I am therefore willing to believe that she was in a fit when we found her under the boiler, and that the deficient teaspoons were attributable to the dustman. Okay. Our treasure was warranted, so we earned the things that we had. And they weren't fancy. That's what they mean by sober. Sober could mean serious. It's the opposite of drunk, but it also could mean serious. It could also mean plain and very practical. So our treasure was warranted. We deserved it. We earned the things that we had in that house. And they were sober things. They weren't fancy. They weren't decorated or very expensive, but they were nice and honest. I am therefore willing to believe that she was in a fit when we found her under the boiler. I'm not sure about that one, that she was in a... so she was under the boiler, so that sounds like maybe she was on the floor. I don't know. But the deficient teaspoons, that means that some of the teaspoons that he had bought were missing. And he blames the dustman. I've heard that word before, dustman, but I'm not... Is that like a man who cleans? Let's see. I've seen that in other places, but I'm not sure. A man whose job it is to empty rubbish from people's dustbins and take it to be disposed of. So the garbage man. But she preyed upon our minds dreadfully. We felt our inexperience, and we were unable to help ourselves. We should have been at her mercy, if she had had any. But she was a remorseless woman, and had none, and she was the cause of our first little quarrel. So they have this servant, but she's older than them and more experienced, and they don't know how to deal with her. They don't know how to take charge of the situation. And so this woman, this servant is taking charge of them. And it was the reason for their first fight. "My dearest," I said one day to Dora, "do you think Mary Ann has any idea of time?" "Why, Dodie?" inquired Dora, looking up innocently from her drawing. "My love, because it's 5, and we were to have dined at 4. Dora glanced wistfully at the clock and hinted that she thought it was too fast. "On the contrary, my love," I said, referring to my watch, "it's a few minutes too slow." My little wife came and sat upon my knee to coax me to be quiet, and drew a line with her pencil down the middle of my nose. But I couldn't dine off that, though it was very agreeable. "Do you think, my dear," said I, "it would be better for you to remonstrate, Mary Ann?" "Oh, no, please, I couldn't, Dodie." So he's saying, "Don't you think you should go tell Mary Ann that she should do her job?" And she's saying, "Oh, I can't, no. "Why not, my love?" I asked gently. "Oh, because I'm such a little goose," said Dora. "And she knows I am. A goose is like a ridiculous person, a silly person." I thought this sentiment so incompatible with the establishment of any system of check on Mary Ann that I frowned a little. "Oh, what ugly wrinkles in my bad boy's forehead," said Dora, and still being on my knee, she traced them with her pencil, putting it to her rosy lips to make it mark blacker, and working at my forehead with a quaint little mockery of being industrious that quite delighted me in spite of myself. "There's a good child," said Dora. "It makes its face so much prettier to laugh." "But, my love," said I. No, please," cried Dora with a kiss. "Don't be a naughty blue beard. Don't be serious." "My precious wife," said I, "we must be serious sometimes. Come, sit down on this chair close beside me. Give me the pencil. There. Now, let us talk sensibly. You know, dear, what a little hand it was to hold, and what a tiny wedding ring it was to see. You know, my love, it's not exactly comfortable to have to go out without one's dinner, now is it?" "No," replied Dora faintly. "My love, how you tremble." "Because I know you're going to scold me." Scolding someone is saying, "You're doing something wrong, you're doing something bad." "Because I know you're going to scold me," exclaimed Dora in a piteous voice. "My sweet, I'm only going to reason." "Oh, but reasoning is worse than scolding," exclaimed Dora in despair. "I didn't marry to be reasoned with. If you meant to reason with such a poor little thing as I am, you ought to have told me so, you cruel boy." I tried to pacify her. Pacify, that comes from the word peace. So you have peace as an adjective, peace is a noun. Peace is a noun, and pacify is a verb. That means make peaceful. I tried to pacify Dora. I tried to make her peaceful. I tried to make her feel calm. I tried to pacify Dora, but she turned away her face and shook her curls from side to side and said, "You cruel, cruel, cruel boy," so many times that I really did not exactly know what to do. So I took a few turns up and down the room in my uncertainty and came back again. "Dora, my darling." "No, I'm not your darling, because you must be sorry that you married me, or else you wouldn't reason with me," returned Dora. I felt so injured by the inconsequential nature of this charge that it gave me courage to be grave. That means serious. Now, my own Dora, said I, you're very childish and are talking nonsense. You must remember, I am sure, that I was obliged to go out yesterday when dinner was half over, and that the day before I was made quite unwell by being obliged to eat an underdone veal in a hurry. Today I don't dine at all, and I'm afraid to say how long we've waited for breakfast. And then the water didn't boil. I don't mean to reproach you, my dear, but this is not comfortable. Oh, you cruel, cruel boy, to say that I am a disagreeable wife, cried Dora. You said I wasn't comfortable, cried Dora. I said the housekeeping was not comfortable. It's exactly the same thing, cried Dora, and she evidently thought so, for she wept most grievously. I took another turn across the room, full of love for my pretty wife, and distracted by self-accusatory inclinations to knock my head against the door. I sat down again and said, I'm not blaming you, Dora. We've both a great deal of work to learn. I'm only trying to show you, my dear, that you really must. I was resolved not to give this up. Accustom yourself to look after Marianne, likewise to act a little for yourself and me. I wonder, I do, at your making such ungrateful speeches, sobbed Dora, when you know that the other day when you said that you would like a little bit of fish, I went out myself, miles and miles, and ordered it to surprise you. And it was very kind of you, my own darling, said I. I felt it so much that I wouldn't on any account, have even mentioned that you bought a salmon, which was too much for two, or that it cost £1.6, which is more than we can afford. You enjoyed it very much, sobbed Dora, and you said I was a mouse. And I'll say so again, my love, I returned 1,000 times. But I had wounded Dora's soft little heart, and she was not to be comforted, and she was so pathetic in her sobbing and bewailing that I felt as if I had said, I don't know what to hurt her. I was obliged to hurry away. I was kept out late, and I felt all night such pangs of remorse as made me miserable. I had the conscience of an assassin, and was haunted by a vague sense of enormous wickedness. It was 2 or 3 hours past midnight when I got home. I found my aunt in our house, sitting up for me. Is anything the matter, Aunt? Said I, alarmed. Nothing, Trot, she replied. Sit down, sit down. Little Blossom has been rather out of spirits, and I have been keeping her company. That's all. I leaned my head upon my hand, and I felt more sorry and downcast, and I sat, looking at the fire, than I could have supposed possible so soon after the fulfillment of my brightest hopes. As I sat, thinking, I happened to meet my aunt's eyes, which were resting on my face. There was an anxious expression in them, but it cleared directly. I assure you, Aunt, said I have been quite unhappy myself all night to think of Dora's being so... But I had no other intention than to speak to her tenderly and lovingly about her home affairs. My aunt nodded an encouragement. You must have patience, Trot, said she. Of course, heaven knows I don't mean to be unreasonable, Aunt. No, no, said my aunt. But Little Blossom is very tender. Little Blossom and the wind must be very gentle with her. Oh, let me read that again. No, no, said my aunt, but Little Blossom is a very tender little blossom, and the wind must be gentle with her. I thanked my good aunt in my heart for her tenderness towards my wife, and was sure that she knew I did. Don't you think, aunt, said I, after some further contemplation of the fire, that you could advise and counsel Dora a little for our mutual advantage now and then? Trot, returned my aunt, with some emotion. No, don't ask me such a thing. Her tone was so very earnest that I raised my eyes in surprise. I look back on my life, child, said my aunt, and I think of some who are in their graves with whom I might have been on kinder terms. If I judged harshly of other people's mistakes in marriage, it might have been because I had bitter reason to judge harshly of my own. Let that pass. I have been a grumpy, frumpy, wayward sort of woman a good many years. I am still, and I always shall be. But you and I have done one another some good, Trot. At all events, you have done me good, my dear. And division must not come between us at this time of day. Division between us, cried I. Child, child, said my aunt, smoothing her dress, how soon it might come between us, or how unhappy I might make our little blossom if I meddled. Meddling is like interfering when you're not supposed to be interfering with something. If I meddled in anything, a prophet couldn't say, I want our pet to like me and be as gay as a butterfly. Remember your own home in that second marriage, and never do both me and her the injury you have hinted at. So she's saying, remember how you grew up when your mother remarried, and how miserable you were with her stepfather and his evil stepsister always interfering in things. I comprehended at once that my aunt was right, and I comprehended the full extent of her generous feeling towards my dear wife. These are early days, Trot, she pursued, and Rome was not built in a day, nor in a year. You have chosen freely for yourself. A cloud passed over her face for a moment, I thought. And you have chosen a very pretty and very affectionate creature. It will be your duty, and it will be your pleasure, too, of course. I know that. I'm not delivering a lecture to estimate her, as you chose her, by the qualities she has, and not by the qualities she may not have. The latter you must develop in her if you can, and if you cannot, child, here my aunt rubbed her nose, you must just accustom yourself to do without him. But remember, my dear, your future is between you two. No one can assist you. You are to work it out for yourselves. That phrasal verb, to work something out, means when there's a problem, to find a solution to the problem. That's very frequently used with relationships. You know, there's the famous Beatles song, we can work it out, we can work it out. That means we can repair the relationship, we can fix the relationship, we can find a solution to these problems that we're having. Heaven bless you both, for a pair of babes in the wood as you are. My aunt said this in a sprightly way and gave me a kiss to ratify the blessing. Now, she said, light my lantern and see me into my bandbox in the garden path, for there was a communication between our cottages in that direction. Give Betsy Trotwood's love to Blossom. When you come back, and whatever you do, Trotwood, never dream of setting Betsy up as a scarecrow, for if I ever saw her in the glass, she's quite grim enough and gaunt enough in her private capacity. With this, my aunt tied up her head in her handkerchief, with which she was accustomed to make a bundle of it on such occasions, and I escorted her home, and she stood in her garden, holding up her little lantern to light me back. I thought her observation of me had an anxious air again, But I was too much occupied in pondering on what she had said, and too much impressed, for the first time in reality, by the conviction that Dora and I had indeed to work out our future for ourselves, and that no one could assist us to take much notice of it. Dora came stealing down in her little slippers to meet me, now that I was alone, and cried upon my shoulder, and said I had been very hard-hearted, and she had been naughty. And I said much the same thing in effect, I believe, and we made it up, and agreed that our first little difference was to be our last, and that we were never to have another if we lived 100 years. The next domestic trial we went through was the ordeal of the servants. Ordeal is kind of like bad situation. It could mean problem. So when you say the ordeal of the servants, that means the problem of the servants. Mary Ann's cousin deserted into our coal hole, and was brought out, to our great amazement, by a picket of his companions in arms, who took him away handcuffed in a procession that covered our front garden with ignominy. So Mary Ann, the servant who is kind of is taking advantage of them, her brother there sometimes is sleeping there or staying there, which is very weird. Or her cousin. So her cousin is staying there, which is weird because he's not working there. And something happened one night where a bunch of people came and they brought him as if he were a criminal and dragged him away from the home, which is very embarrassing. That's what this ignominy means. It means they're very embarrassed because it seems like this guy is getting arrested or attacked because he did something bad, and all the attention is focused on their house. This nerved me to get rid of Mary Ann, who went so mildly on receipt of wages that I was surprised. So he fired Mary Ann, and it was much easier than he thought it would be. Until I found out that the teaspoons, and also about the little sums she had borrowed in my name of the tradespeople without authority. So she stole some teaspoons and also borrowed money from various shops in the neighborhood under Davy's name. So she was like, okay, I'll go. But she left with quite a bit. After an interval of Mr. Kidgebury, the oldest inhabitant of Kentish Town, I believe, who went out charing, but was too feeble to execute her conceptions of that art, we found another treasure, who was one of the most amiable of women, but who generally made a point of falling either up or down the kitchen stairs with a tray, and almost plunged into the parlor, as into the bath, with the tea things. The ravages committed by the unfortunate rendering her dismissal necessary, she was succeeded, with intervals of Mrs. Kidgerbury, by a long line of incapables, terminating in a young person of genteel appearance who went to Greenwich Fair in Dora's bonnet, after whom I remember nothing but an average equality of failure. Everybody we had anything to do with seemed to cheat us. Our appearance in a shop was a signal for the damaged goods to be brought out immediately. If we bought a lobster, it was full of water. All of our meat turned out to be tough, and there was hardly any crust to our loaves. In search of the principle on which joints ought to have been roasted, to be roasted enough and not too much, I myself referred to the cookery book, and found it there established as the allowance of 1/4 of an hour to every pound, and to say 1/4 over. But the principle always failed us by some curious fatality, and we never could hit any medium between redness and cinders. So everybody's cheating them because they're a young couple taking advantage of their inexperience, And since Dora didn't refuse to learn how to cook, Davy tried learning how to cook. So he started reading the cookbook. But still, he wasn't very good at it. I had reason to believe that in accomplishing these failures, we incurred a far greater expense than if we had achieved a series of triumphs. It appeared to me, on looking over the tradesmen's books, as if we might have kept the basement story paved with butter. Such was the extensive scale of our consumption of that article. I don't know whether the excise returns of the period may have exhibited any increase in the demand for pepper, but if our performances did not affect the market, I should say several families must have left off using it, and the most wonderful fact of all was that we never had anything in the house. So they're paying an enormous amount for butter and pepper, but they don't have any. So it's very strange. It seems like they're learning that they're overpaying for things. As to the washerwoman pawning the clothes, pawning is when you take something and you go and sell it to someone. So the washerwoman was taking their clothes and selling it to people. As to the washerwoman pawning the clothes and coming in a state of penitent intoxication to apologize. So she went out and pawned the clothes. She bought alcohol with it, got extremely drunk, and then came back and said, "I stole the clothes, I'm sorry." I suppose that might have happened several times to anybody. Also, the chimney on fire, the parish engine, the perjury on the part of the beadle. But I apprehend that we were personally fortunate in engaging a servant with a taste for cordials, who swelled our running account for porter at the public house by such inexplicable items as quartern rum shrub, Mrs. C., half-quartern gin and cloves, Mrs. C., glass of rum and peppermint, Mrs. C., the parentheses always referring to Dora, who was supposed, it appeared on explanation, to imbibe the whole of these refreshments. One of our first feats. A feat is like an amazing accomplishment that you do. So one of our first amazing accomplishments in housekeeping, one of our first feats in housekeeping way was a little dinner to Traddles. I met him in town and asked him to walk out with me that afternoon. He readily consented. I wrote to Dora saying I would bring him home. It was pleasant weather, and on the road we made my domestic happiness the theme of conversation. Traddles was very full of it, and said that picturing himself with such a home and Sophie waiting and preparing for him, he could think of nothing wanting to complete his bliss. I could not have wished for a prettier little wife at the opposite end of the table, but I certainly could have wished, when we sat down, for a little more room. I did not know how it was, but though we were only two of us, we were at once very cramped for room, and yet had always room enough to lose everything in. I suspect it may have been because nothing had a place of its own except Jip's pagoda, which invariably blocked up the main thoroughfare. On the present occasion, Traddles was so hemmed in by the pagoda and the guitar case and Dora's flower painting and my writing table that I had serious doubts of the possibility of his using his knife and fork. But he protested, with his own good humor. Oceans of room, Copperfield, I assure you, oceans. There was another thing I could have wished, namely that Jip had never been encouraged to walk about the table during dinner. Oh no. I began to think there was something disorderly in his being there at all. And even if he had not been in the habit of putting his foot in the salt or the melted butter, on this occasion he seemed to think he was introduced expressly to keep Traddles at bay, and he barked at my old friend and made short runs at his plate, with such undaunted pertinacity that he may be said to have engrossed the conversation. However, as I knew how tender-hearted my dear Dora was, and how sensitive she would be to any slight upon her favorite, I hinted no objection. For similar reasons, I made no allusion to the skirmishing plates upon the floor, or the disreputable appearance of the castors, which were all at 6 and 7s, and looked drunk, or at the further blockade of Traddles by wandering vegetable dishes and jugs. I could not help wondering in my own hand, as I contemplated the boiled leg of mutton before me, previous to carving it, how it came to pass that our joints of meat were of such extraordinary shapes, and whether our butcher contracted for all the deformed sheep that came into the world. But I kept my reflections to myself. "My love," said I to Dora, "what have you got in that dish?" I could not imagine why Dora had been making tempting little faces at me, as if she wanted to kiss me. "Oysters, dear," said Dora timidly. "Was that your thought?" said I, delighted. Yes, Dodie," said Dora. "There never was a happier one," I exclaimed, laying down the carving knife and fork. "There's nothing Traddles likes so much." Yes, Dodie," said Dora. "So I bought a beautiful little barrel of them, and the man said they were very good. But I'm afraid there's something the matter with them. They don't seem right." Here Dora shook her head, and diamonds twinkled in her eyes. "They're only opened in both shells," said I. "Take the top off, my love." "But it won't come off," said Dora, trying very hard and looking very much distressed. "Do you know, Copperfield," said Traddles cheerfully, examining the dish, "I think it is in consequence, they are capital oysters, but I think it is in consequence of their never having been opened." They never had been opened, and we had no oyster knives and couldn't use them if we had. So we looked at the oysters and ate the mutton. At least we ate so much of it as was done, and made up with capers. If I had permitted him, I'm satisfied that Traddles would have made the perfect savage of himself and eaten a plateful of raw meat to express enjoyment of the repast. But I would hear of no such immolation on the altar of friendship, and we had a course of bacon instead, there happening by good fortune to be cold bacon in the larder. My poor little wife was in such affliction when she thought I should be annoyed, and in such a state of joy when she found I was not. And the discomfiture I had subdued very soon vanished, and we passed a happy evening. Dora sitting with her arm on my chair, while Traddles and I discussed a glass of wine, and taking every opportunity of whispering in my ear that it was so good of me not to be a cruel, cross old boy. By and by she made tea for us, which it was so pretty to see her do, as if she was busying herself with a set of dolls' tea things, and I was so particular about the quality of the beverage. And then Traddles and I played a game or two at cribbage, and Dora singing to the guitar, the while. It seemed to me as if our courtship were a tender dream of mine, and the night, when I first listened to her voice, were not yet over. When Traddles went away and I came back into the parlor from seeing him out, my wife planted in her chair close to mine and sat down by my side. "I'm very sorry," she said. "Will you try to teach me, Dodie?" "I must teach myself first, Dora," said I. "I'm so bad as you, love." "Ah, but you can learn," she returned. "And you're clever man." "Nonsense, mouse," said I. I wish, resumed my wife, after a long silence, that I could have gone down into the country for a whole year and lived with Agnes. Her hands were clasped upon my shoulder, and her chin rested on them, with her blue eyes looking quietly into mine. Why so? I asked. I think she might have improved me. I think I might have learned from her, said Dora. All in good time, my love. Agnes has had her father to take care of for these many years. You should remember, even when she was quite a child, she was the Agnes whom we know, said I. Will you call me a name I want you to call me? Inquired Dora without moving. What is it? I asked with a smile. It's a stupid name, she said, shaking her curls for a moment. Child wife. Laughingly, I asked my child wife what her fancy was in desiring to be so called, and she answered without moving, otherwise than as an arm, and I twined about her may have brought her blue eyes nearer to me. She answered without moving, otherwise than as an arm, as I twined about her. Twining, that would be like twisting, twining. About her brought her blue eyes nearer to me. That's a weird sentence. Okay, let's just keep going. I don't mean, you silly fellow, that you should use the name Dora. You should use the name instead of Dora. I only mean that you should think of me that way. And when you're going to be angry with me, say to yourself, it is only my child wife. When I'm very disappointing, say, I know a long time ago that she would make but a child wife. When you miss what I should like to be, and you think I can never be, say, still my foolish child wife loves me, for indeed I do. I had not been serious with her, having no idea until now that she was so serious about herself. But her affectionate nature was so happy, and what I now said to her with my whole heart, that her face became a laughing one before her glittering eyes were dry. She was soon my child wife indeed, sitting down on the floor outside the Chinese house, ringing all the little bells one after another to punish Jip for his recent bad behavior, while Jip lay blinking in the doorway with his head out, even too lazy to be teased. This appeal of Dora's made a strong impression on me. I look back on the time I write of. I invoke the innocent figure that I dearly loved to come out from the mists and shadows of the past and turn its gentle head towards me once again. I can still declare that this one little speech was constantly in my memory. I may not have used it to the best account. I was young and inexperienced, but I never turned a deaf ear to its artless pleading. Dora told me shortly afterwards that she was going to be a wonderful housekeeper. Accordingly, she polished the tablets, pointed the pencil, bought an immense account book, carefully stitched up with a needle and thread, all the leaves of the cookery book which Jip had torn, and made quite a desperate little attempt to be good, as she called it. But the figures had the old obstinate propensity. They would not add up. When she had entered 2 or 3 laborious items in the account, Jip would walk over the page, wagging his tail, and smear them all out. Her own little right hand middle finger got steeped to the very bone in ink, and I think that was the only decided result obtained. Sometimes of an evening, when I was at home and at work, for I wrote a good deal, and I was beginning in a small way to be known as a writer, I would lay down my pen and watch my child wife trying to be good. First of all, she would bring out the immense account book and lay it down upon the table with a deep sigh. And then she would open it at the place where Jip had made it illegible the last night and call Jip up to look at his misdeeds. This would occasion a diversion in Jip's favor and some inking of his nose, perhaps, as a penalty. And then she would tell Jip to lie down on the table instantly, like a lion, which was one of his tricks, though I cannot say the likeness was striking. And if he were in obedient humor, he would obey, and then she would take up a pen and begin to write, and find hair in it. Then she would take up another pen and begin to write, and find it spluttered. Then she would take up another pen and begin to write, and say in a low voice, "Oh, it's a talking pen, and will disturb Dodie." And then she would give it up as a bad job and put the account book away after pretending to crush the lion with it. So first she would take the book and go, to the dog. Or if she were in a very sedate and serious state of mind, she would sit down with the tablets and a little basket of bills and other documents, which looked more like curl papers than anything else, and endeavor to get some result out of them, after severely comparing one with the other, and making entries in the tablet, and then blotting them out, and counting all the fingers of her left hand over and over again, backwards and forwards. She would be so vexed. Vexed is like annoyed. She would be so vexed, so annoyed, and discouraged, and would look so unhappy, that it gave me a pain to see her bright face clouded. And I would softly go to her and say, "What's the matter, Dora?" Dora would look hopelessly and reply, "They won't come right. They make my head ache so, and they won't do anything I want." Then I would say, "Now, let us try together. Let me show you, Dora." And then I would commence a practical demonstration, which Dora would pay profound attention, perhaps for 5 minutes, when she would begin to be dreadfully tired, and would lighten the subject by curling my hair, or trying the effect on my face with a shirt collar turned down. If I tacitly checked this playfulness and persisted, she would look so scared and disconsolate. She became more and more bewildered, that the remembrance of her natural gaiety when I first strayed into her path, of her being my child wife, would come reproachfully upon me, and would lay the pencil down and call for the guitar. I had a great deal of work to do, and had many anxieties. But the same considerations made me keep them to myself. I am far from sure now that it was right to do this, but I did it for my child wife's sake. I search my breast. This is the breast, but that could mean the heart. Like I search my heart. I search my breast, and I commit its secrets, if I know them, without any reservation, to this paper. The old unhappy loss or want of something had, I'm conscious, some place in my heart, but not to the embitterment of my life. When I walked alone in the fine weather and thought of the summer days when all the air had been filled with my boyish enchantment, I did miss something of the realization of my dreams, but I thought it was softened glory of the past, which nothing could have thrown upon the present time. I did feel sometimes, for a little while, that I could have wished my wife had been my counselor, had had more character and purpose to sustain me and improve me by, had been endowed with the power to fill up the void which somewhere seemed to be about me. But I felt as if this were an unearthly consummation of my happiness that never had been meant to be, and never could have been. I was a boyish husband as to years. I had known the softening influence of no other sorrows or experiences than those recorded in these leaves. If I did anything wrong, as I may have done much, I did it in mistaken love, in my want of wisdom. I write the exact truth. It would avail me nothing to extenuate it now. Thus it was that I took upon myself the toils and cares of our life. I had no partner in them. We lived much as before in reference to our scrambling household arrangements. But I had gotten used to those, and Dora, I was pleased to see, was seldom vexed now. She was bright and cheerful in old childish way, loved me dearly, and was happy with her old trifles. When the debates were heavy, I mean as to length, not to quality, for in the last respect they were not often otherwise, I went home late, and Dora would never rest when she heard my footsteps, but would always come downstairs to meet me when my evenings were unoccupied by the pursuit for which I had qualified myself with so much pains, and I was engaged in writing at home. She would sit quietly near me, however late the hour, and be so mute that I would often think she had dropped asleep, but generally, when I raised my head, I saw her blue eyes looking at me with the quiet attention of which I have already spoken. Oh, what a weary boy. Weary means tired. Oh, what a weary boy. Sorry. Yeah, oh, what a weary boy, said Dora one night when I met her eyes and I was shutting up my desk. What a weary girl, said I. That's more to the purpose. You must go to bed another time, my love. It's far too late for you. No, don't send me to bed, pleaded Dora, coming to my side. Pray, don't do that. Dora, to my amazement, she was sobbing on my neck. Not well, my dear, not happy. Yes, quite well, and very happy, said Dora. But say you'll let me stop and see you write. Why, what a sight for such bright eyes at midnight, I replied. Are they bright, though? Returned Dora, laughing. I'm so glad they're bright. Little vanity, said I. But it was not vanity. It was only harmless delight in my admiration. I know that very well. Before she told me so. If you think them pretty, say I may always stop and see you write, said Dora. Do you think them pretty? Very pretty. Then let me always stop and see you write. I'm afraid that won't improve their brightness, Dora. Yes, it will, because you, clever boy, you'll not forget me then, while you're full of silent fancies. Will you mind it if I say something very, very silly? More than usual? Inquired Dora, peeping over my shoulder into my face. What wonderful thing is that? Said I. Please, let me hold the pens, said Dora. I want to have something to do with all those many hours when you're so industrious. May I hold the pens? The remembrance of her pretty joy when I said yes brings tears to my eyes. The next time I sat down to write, and regularly afterwards, she sat in her old place, with a spare bundle of pens at her side. Her triumph in this connection with my work, and her delight in it, and her delight when I wanted a new pen, which was very often, Feigned to do. Feigning, that's not really a common word now, but that means like fake, pretending. So sometimes Davy would just pretend that he wanted a new pen just to make her happy. Like, oh, darn it, I need a new pen. And she, here's a new pen. So he would feign that he needed a new pen, which means fake or pretend that he needed a new pen. Suggested to me a new way of pleasing my child wife. I occasionally made a pretense of wanting a page or two of manuscript copied. Then Dora was in her glory. The preparations that she made for this great work, the aprons that she put on, the bibs that she borrowed from the kitchen to keep off the ink, the time she took, the innumerable stoppages she made to have a laugh with Jip, as if he understood it all. Her conviction that her work was incomplete unless she signed her name at the end, and the way in which she would bring it to me, like a school copy, and then, when I praised it, clasped me round the neck, are touching recollections to me, simply as they might appear to other men. She took possession of those keys soon after this and went jingling about the house with the whole bunch in a little basket tied to her slender waist. I seldom found that the places to which they belonged were locked, or that they were of any use except as a plaything for Jip, but Dora was pleased, and that pleased me, and she was quite satisfied that a good deal was effected by this make-believe of housekeeping, and was as merry as if had been keeping a baby house for a joke. So we went on. Dora was hardly less affectionate to my aunt than to me, and often told her of the time when she was afraid that she was a cross old thing, and never saw my aunt unbend more systematically to anyone. She courted Jip, though Jip never responded, listened day after day to the guitar, though I'm afraid she had no taste for music, never attacked the incapables, though the temptation must have been severe. Went wonderful distances on foot to purchase as surprises any trifles that she found out Dora wanted, and never came in by the garden, and missed her from the room, but she would call out at foot from the stairs, in a voice that sounded cheerfully all over the house, "Where's little Blossom?" Okay, well that was the end of chapter 44. So next time we will be reading chapter 45, which is Mr. Dick Fulfills My Aunt's Predictions, which we will be doing very shortly. But thank you for staying and watching, and I hope you come back to watch chapter 45. Goodbye.